This year, the UK's long-awaited Online Safety Act went into effect. It was pitched as a way to protect children and make the internet a safer place. But what the law actually does is something far more dangerous. The Act gives the government sweeping authority to regulate what content platforms can and can't show. And it does this through vague, arbitrary definitions of harm. According to the law, platforms must shield users, especially children, from anything that might cause offense, distress, or harm. But what does that even mean? And that's not a rhetorical question. If your platform can be punished for failing to protect users from offensive content, you now have to guess what regulators consider offensive. And when the penalty is up to 10% of global revenue, most companies aren't going to take risks. They're going to over-censor. And they already are. Since the law took effect, major platforms like Reddit, Discord, and even Spotify have started implementing age gates and facial recognition to comply. UK users are now being asked to upload IDs, grant access to their financial records, or submit face scans just to prove they're old enough to view mature content on platforms that might include music or memes. Even US-based websites are being targeted. Ofcom, the UK's communications regulator, has already started sending enforcement letters to foreign sites, including political forums like Gab. And it gets worse. The law allows Ofcom to implement something called business disruption measures, which allow regulators the power to shut down sites indirectly. If a platform hosts content the UK government doesn't like, Ofcom can order payment processors, advertisers, and even internet providers to cut ties. That means the site can't get paid, and UK users can't even access it. This isn't theoretical. These powers are active right now. And they don't just affect porn sites or extremist forums. They apply to any platform accessible from the UK, from search engines to games to blogs. If there's a risk children might see harmful content, the platform must take action or be punished. But the most disturbing part is how subjective the rules are. The law separates content into 3 tiers. Primary priority content, like porn or self-harm encouragement. Priority content, like bullying, violent imagery, or hate speech. And a final tier called non-designated content, defined as anything that presents a material risk of significant harm to children, unless that harm comes from financial issues, product quality, or service performance. So if your content promotes toxic financial advice, dangerous products, or scam services, you might be fine. But if it expresses controversial political or social opinions, well, you might be at risk. And let's be honest, no one knows where the line is. Not the platforms, not the regulators, and that's the point. The ambiguity gives regulators plausible deniability while companies do the censoring for them. If your content steps out of line even slightly, you can be financially blacklisted. No Visa, no PayPal, no Stripe, no revenue. And it's not just about blocking money. As I mentioned earlier, these same powers extend to internet service providers, meaning the UK can demand that ISPs block access to sites entirely. That's the kind of authoritarian control most people associate with China or Iran, not a liberal democracy. We've already seen what happens when payment processors act as moral gatekeepers. Do we really want ISPs joining the censorship party? Recently, Visa and Mastercard were pressured by an activist group to cut off adult game developers on Steam. Over 1,000 games were affected, not because of any criminal content, but because one feminist organization found them distasteful. And despite Visa and Mastercard's assurances that they don't make moral judgments and that their policies are to process all legal payments, the games were still removed. The developers lost income, and not because of any court ruling, but because Visa didn't like the optics. And this is exactly why the Online Safety Act is so dangerous. It codifies this very power. It turns those private decisions into official enforcement tools. So any talk about how the act is intended to protect children or stop hate should be completely ignored. Even if the intentions were noble, that's not what this law will do. The OSA defines harmful content in the vaguest possible terms. For example, the non-designated category I mentioned earlier includes anything that is likely to cause significant harm to a, quote, appreciable number of children. That's not a legal standard, it's a vibe. And when the law is built on vibes, fear will fill the gaps. Platforms don't know what content qualifies. Payment processors don't know what's safe, so they overcorrect. They remove anything that might cause them trouble. Not because it's dangerous, but because someone might say it is. This is how censorship works in the modern age. Not through book burnings, not through arrests, but through chilling effects, pressure, and paranoia. Through systems defined so broadly that no one dares to test the boundaries. Now, defenders of the OSA continue to tell us that age verification is simply a reasonable precaution, certainly not censorship. But let's talk about what that really means in practice. To access millions of websites, including adult content, forums, games, music platforms, and even some parts of social media, you now have to submit sensitive personal data. That means uploading your passport, recording a face scan, or handing over access to bank data just to prove you're an adult. This isn't consent, it's coercion. It forces users to make an impossible choice: your privacy or your access to the internet. And arguably, that's not even the worst part. Many of these services are ran by third-party vendors, companies you've never heard of with their own incentives and vulnerabilities. Your biometric data and identity info are being funneled through profit-seeking middlemen with no real guarantee that your data won't be leaked, sold, or abused. And what about the millions of people who can't verify their age? People without identification, those using public computers, and anyone who can't safely identify themselves because of where they live, who they live with, or what they believe. They don't get access, they don't get a choice, they get locked out of entire parts of the internet because the UK government decided it was the only way to keep children safe. In the process, however, it punishes everyone. But whatever the government's intentions, what they hope to achieve, the public's reaction tells a different story. Just days after these new safety measures took effect, VPNs shot to the top of app stores in the UK. Millions of users are fleeing the censored web, bypassing restrictions by hiding their location and encrypting their traffic. In short, people are rejecting this law with their behavior. But instead of treating that as a warning sign, UK officials are now looking very closely at VPN usage in the country. And that should terrify you. When governments start monitoring who's trying to escape censorship, it's only a matter of time before they start banning the escape routes altogether. And while the UK insists that there are no current plans to ban VPNs, that's often political code for not yet. If they were serious about protecting privacy and access, they wouldn't be surveilling VPN usage in the first place. But users are fighting back. Over 400,000 people have signed a petition demanding the Online Safety Act be repealed. Advocacy groups across the political spectrum, from privacy watchdogs to free speech defenders, are calling this law exactly what it is: an authoritarian overreach that has no place in a free society. There's a sobering lesson here about what happens when support for free expression is conditional. Laws like this don't appear overnight. They're the product of a slow erosion, of treating speech as something to be tolerated only when it's agreeable. Sadly, many of the same outlets and activist groups who are now outraged by this law once cheered when platforms removed content they consider harmful. They celebrated censorship when voices they disliked were being banned, and only now, when expression they approve of is at risk, do they understand the cost. For years, calls for censorship were met with applause, so long as the targets were unpopular voices. Big tech platforms deplatformed creators, payment processors cut off access, games, books, and videos disappeared overnight. And a lot of people, sadly, were fine with it. But the problem with censorship, as they're now learning, is that it's not just about who it targets today, but who it targets tomorrow. Free expression can't exist just for the people we agree with. In fact, it's especially important for those we don't. Because the moment you make exceptions, carve out little areas where censorship is acceptable, you create a system that will inevitably expand. And it has. Once the precedent is set, every government, every payment processor, every activist group can claim that their version of harm justifies the suppression. That's why support for free expression has to be principled. It can't depend on who's getting silenced or whether we personally like them. Otherwise, we're not standing for a right, we're just picking sides. So to anyone who suddenly found your voice after the OSA or rogue payment processors threatened something you value, good, keep speaking. But don't stop there. Speak up next time it happens to someone else. Because you can't fix a censorship machine by begging it to target someone else. You have to oppose the machine itself. Now, the situation may look bleak, but the fight isn't over, and there are concrete things we can do. In the UK, the most important thing is to challenge the Online Safety Act directly. That means demanding repeal, contacting your MPs, signing petitions, and refusing to comply with invasive age verification systems. This law will not go away on its own. It needs to be fought publicly, loudly, and persistently. For those outside the UK, especially in countries that still have some respect for free expression, the threat looks different. Here, the danger isn't government, it's corporate overreach. Payment processors, hosting providers, and distribution platforms are slowly taking control of what we're allowed to watch, read, and play. And that's why legal safeguards are so vital. Laws that protect access to essential infrastructure regardless of moral or political pressure. No private company should be able to shut you out of the modern economy just because your content offends somebody. Of course, passing laws is a lengthy process. If you want to take action now, I once again encourage you to sign this petition. Tell Mastercard, Visa, and activist groups, stop controlling what we can watch, read, or play. The link is in the description. It's a small step, but it matters. It's equally important to keep up the assault on Visa, Mastercard, and other payment processors. So far, gamers have done a wonderful job of making our voices heard. Several of these companies have already felt pressured to respond publicly, so keep it up. The more we speak out, the harder we become to ignore, and the closer we get to a future where free expression actually matters again.